In the pulsing heart of Kariwa Market, where the air was thick with the scent of roasted maize, car smoke, sweat, and survival, moved a woman whose strength echoed louder than the vendors' voices. The market was a symphony of chaos, men shouting over crates of tomatoes, women arguing over the price of vegetables, boda-bodas weaving through tight corners, and radios blaring old traditional tunes from makeshift stalls. But amidst the hustle, there was one figure that never changed, a faded headscarf, calloused hands gripping the rough wooden handles of a handcart, a kitenge skirt gathered above the ankles to avoid mud and spilt cooking oil. That was her, Mama Timo, as the market called her, but her real name was Naka. She wasn't loud like the fishmongers. She didn't need to be. Her presence was enough. The wheels of her cart groaned under the weight of sacks, crates, and hope, but she pulled them with quiet dignity, day after day, year after year, no matter the weather, whether the sun was scorching or the rains flooded the gutters of the market. Naka came. At dawn, before even the first cock crowed, she was already sweeping the dust off her path with her shoes, making her way to the stalls with the same grit and grace that had carried her through life's hardest trials. To the onlookers, she was just a delivery woman, just another soul trying to survive the madness of Nairobi's streets. But those who looked closely saw more. They saw fire in her eyes. They saw stories etched into the wrinkles on her face. They saw a woman who had been bruised by life, but had never let herself break. Naka was not born into the market. She didn't grow up with a cart in her hands. Her story began far from the smoke and dust of Kariwa, in the quiet hills of Muna village, where dreams were planted like maize and often swallowed by drought. Back then, she had dreams too, big ones. But life, cruel and unpredictable, had other plans. The market was never her destination. It became her battlefield, her altar, her redemption. And in that chaos, amid reckless buses, rude customers, and endless sweat, she carved a legacy. Not one of riches or recognition, but one of resilience, the kind that can't be bought, the kind that raises children, the kind that keeps moving, even when the whole world tells you to give up. Every morning before sunrise, Naka tied a worn lasso around her waist, adjusted the headscarf on her braids, and gripped the wooden handles of her old handcart. The cart creaked and groaned, its wheels uneven, but it moved, just like her. Her path was never easy. She dodged potholes, reckless motorbikes, shouting touts and impatient buses. She knew every shortcut, every gutter, every mood of the market. Rain or shine, Naka was there. They called her the woman with the cart, but no one knew the storm she had survived. At just 18, Naka was the pride of her small village, Muno. In a place where many girls were married off before they could finish primary school, Naka stood out like a star in a dark sky. She was bright-eyed, quick with her tongue, and even quicker with her mind. The elders often said she had a man's brain, and while some meant it as a compliment, others muttered it with unease. She wore her dreams like a crown, visible, proud, and untouchable. Naka wanted to become a schoolteacher, not just because she loved books, but because she believed deeply that knowledge was power. Her favorite place was the dusty veranda of the village chief's abandoned library, where she'd sit cross-legged with torn storybooks, sounding out every syllable like it was magic. She would gather the neighborhood children on weekends, drawing letters in the sand with a stick, her voice clear as she taught them songs and simple math. Her dream was simple but bold, to change the world one child at a time. She imagined standing in front of a blackboard, chalk in hand, helping children unlock the same light that books had given her. Her teachers believed in her, often saying, "This one will go far." Her mother whispered blessings into her hair every morning. Even her father, a stern man who rarely praised anyone, once said at a community meeting, "That daughter of mine, she'll wear shoes made for city floors." But dreams are fragile things in poor villages, and sometimes the world doesn't wait for you to finish them. Then she fell in love with Samuel. He was older, charming in the kind of way that made girls forget their worries. A smooth-talking man from the city, with polished shoes, cologne that lingered, and a confidence that filled any room he stepped into. To Naka, who had never left her small village of Muno, he was everything she thought love looked like. He called her "my beautiful one," told her she had the kind of eyes that made men lose sleep, and said her laugh reminded him of music. He painted pictures of a life in Nairobi: a little apartment, Sunday walks in the park, a baby playing on the carpet while he cooked them dinner. She was just 18, bright-eyed and full of dreams, and she believed him. How could she not? He said he would marry her, that he'd speak to her parents, that his job as a mechanic was just the beginning, that soon he'd have his own garage and she would never lack anything. "You'll wear high heels and carry handbags with gold zippers," he'd whisper into her ear. "We'll live like royalty." She gave him her heart and her body, but the day she told him she was pregnant, everything changed. His smile faded. The warmth in his eyes turned to stone. He mumbled something about bad timing and not being ready, and the next morning he was gone, vanished like smoke in the wind. No calls, no letter, nothing but silence. Word came weeks later that he had gone back to Nairobi, back to the city lights and the other promises he'd likely made to other girls. He had erased her from his story as easily as someone wiping chalk off a blackboard. And just like that, the dream shattered. She was alone, with nothing but a growing belly and a heart heavy with betrayal. No calls, no support, and when she turned to her parents for help one early morning, her belly barely beginning to show, her eyes swollen from nights of silent crying. It was not comfort she received, it was judgment. Her mother sat on the wooden stool by the hearth, staring into the fire, head bowed, saying nothing. She wept, not for Naliaka's pain, but for her own shame. But it was her father who spoke, his words as sharp as broken glass. "You have brought shame into this home," he said, his voice flat, unyielding. "You, who we raised with hope and pride, now stand before us carrying a stranger's child? You chose your path, Naliaka. Now follow it." She tried to speak, to explain that Samuel had promised marriage, that he had disappeared without a word, that she didn't ask for this. But the words caught in her throat. Her father stood, walked to the doorway, and without looking back, added, "You will not bring disgrace under my roof. Go." And just like that, the door to her childhood, her safety, her dreams, her name, closed behind her. Her mother didn't even hug her goodbye. So Naliaka walked away, barefoot and trembling, with nothing but a fraying bag slung over her shoulder and the weight of her unborn child pressing into her ribs. The path to the main road had never felt so long. Every tree seemed to whisper what the villagers would soon shout. Every step away from Muno felt like walking out of the only life she had ever known. She was 18, betrayed, disowned, and utterly alone. But something in her would not break. She didn't know it yet, but this moment, this heartbreak, would become the very fire that forged her strength. She prepared the tumper strong to the number one. She boarded a dusty, rattling matatu, headed to Nairobi. She had no plan, just hope, a few crumpled shillings, and the name of a girl she once sat next to in Form 2, who knew someone who lived near Jiba. But Nairobi was nothing like what she'd imagined. The matatu dropped her off in town just before dusk, and the city swallowed her whole. The girl she hoped to find had long since moved, no one knew where. With no one to stay with, Naliaka wandered the streets, pregnant, frightened, and utterly alone. Her first night she slept in a half-built construction site, curled beneath a sheet of carton, the concrete biting into her back. She watched the stars blink above her like distant promises and cried until her throat ached. She hadn't eaten all day, only drank tap water from a leaking pipe. In the days that followed, she became one with the city's forgotten. She begged when she had no choice, pleaded with food vendors to let her sweep or wipe tables for leftovers. Sometimes they gave her bread, sometimes just silence. She hustled. She learned quickly where the buses stopped, where the matatu touts tossed out rejected luggage, and where fruit vendors dumped scraps at closing time. She picked mango skins from trash bins, wiped them clean with her scarf, and called it dinner. Some nights she found shelter beneath staircases, in the back of churches, or inside iron sheet kiosks after the owners closed. Other nights she stayed awake, clutching her belly, singing softly to the child growing inside her. She called him Hope before he even had a name. The cold was cruel, but not as cruel as the stairs. People looked past her as if she were made of smoke. A girl, dirty and pregnant, meant nothing in a city that chewed and spat out the weak. And yet she endured. With every dawn came another small fight to survive. She washed clothes for mothers in the slums, carried sacks for market women, fetched water for 5 shillings a jerrycan, and scrubbed floors in garages. The money was barely enough for food, but it kept her alive. There were days she fainted from hunger, nights she thought of giving up, of returning to the village to face her father's rage and the villagers' whispers. But then the baby kicked, a flutter, soft and insistent, a reminder that she had a reason to keep moving. And so she did. Through the grime, the hunger, the exhaustion, and the endless noise of a city that never slept, Naka walked, worked, and waited. She didn't have a home, she didn't have family, but she had a will that refused to bend, and somehow that was enough. Nairobi was no paradise. She slept in unfinished buildings and under staircases. She begged, she hustled. Sometimes she went to bed with nothing but water in her belly. But she was determined. One day, at Kariwa Market, a kind trader named Mama Wisa offered her a simple job: carry a basket of bananas across the market for 20 shillings. Naka did it without complaint. The next day she returned, carried more. Soon, she borrowed an old handcart from a retired porter. That was the day she started building her future. Her son was born on a Monday morning after a night of labor in a public clinic. She named him Timo, for he was her hope. Life wasn't easy. Some days the cart broke down, some days her feet blistered from walking 10 hours non-stop, but Naka pressed on, through thunderstorms, through hunger, through exhaustion so deep she'd fall asleep sitting up. People gossiped. Who is she, pulling a cart like a man? She should go back to her village, but Naka had no room for shame. She had children to raise. Timo grew up in the back of stalls, helping their mother count change, pack crates, and study by candlelight. He watched her toil and never complain. When his shoes tore, she patched them. When school fees were due, she pulled double shifts. Timo once found her crying behind a pile of pineapples after a customer refused to pay. "Don't cry, Mama," he said, hugging her knees. "One day I will build you a big house with my own hands." Naka smiled, wiping her tears. "Just work hard, my son. That's all I ask." And he did. Timo excelled in school, always top of his class. Teachers loved him for his discipline. He never missed a day, no matter how little food was in the house. Naka became a legend in Kariwa Market. Even the traffic police respected her hustle. Motorbike riders moved aside when she passed. Traders saved space for her cart. She was more than a delivery woman. She was a symbol of grit. One day, she collapsed from fatigue. The market women pooled money to take her to the hospital. She stayed home for a week, and the market felt empty without her. But she returned, stronger. When Timo finished secondary school, he got a scholarship to study engineering, and 4 years later, he graduated with honours. His graduation photo, with Naka beside him in her Sunday dress and a wide, proud smile, went viral online. A woman who had once delivered vegetables with a splintered cart had raised an engineer. 2 years after university, Timo got a job with an international construction company. He saved every coin, refusing to live large. Then one day, he surprised his mother. He took her to a quiet neighborhood in Raqqa. In front of a small but beautiful house, with blue windows and a tiny garden, he handed her a bunch of keys. "Mama," he said, tears in his eyes, "this is your home. You'll never pull a cart again. You can rest now." Naka trembled. The same hands that had pulled that cart across broken roads now held the keys to rest. She walked into the house slowly, seeing the soft bed, the real kitchen, the bathroom with running water. She knelt on the tiled floor and wept and prayed, not from sadness, but from the weight of joy. That night, they sat on the veranda, drinking tea and watching the stars. "Mama," Timo said softly, "you carried us. Now, it's time I carry you." And from that day on, she never worked another delivery. But every Sunday, she returned to the market, not with her cart, but with her stories. Young women sat around her like students, learning not just how to survive, but how to rise. And when they asked how she did it, Naka would smile and say, "I didn't have much, but I had faith, I had love, and I never stopped moving." Thank you so much for watching. Please like, share and subscribe to this channel for more stories.